The race for president has generated a huge audience in and well beyond America. Today, we get a European perspective from Martin Klingst, the journalist and longtime Washington correspondent for Germany's Die Zeit newspaper. He believes this election will impact everything, from the European Union to the future of the Western world, and just about everything else. From Ballard Studios in Washington, D.C., another special election edition of 13th and Park.
You and I can differ, but that doesn't mean you and I cannot be friends.
That often is missing in politics.
We went from North Korea to M&M. That's a lot, man.
Aliens could have invaded and nothing would surprise me at this point.
It's a nightmare.
Those are the facts.
We have to solve everything.
What's in this tea?
Martin, welcome to the show. I want to say welcome back to D.C., but you spent a lot of time in D.C. and you kind of know your way around town, so to speak.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. I was based here for 7 years, from 2007 to 2014. I've been here before. I came back almost every year, a couple of times, so I know the city quite well.
What have you observed that maybe is different about what's going on right now in American politics versus things that you've had experience with in years past?
Well, I think there's a lot of energy at the moment. You have not seen that in 2020. That's probably also due to Corona and the pandemic at the time, so that made a huge difference. I've seen all the energy in 2008 and 2012 with Obama, and I can see some of the energy now on Trump's side. So you see a lot of people lining up for hours and hours to see him. And I've also seen more young people, though I would say mainly young white men who, flock to his campaigns.
For someone like Donald Trump, who, has run before, has served before, and is trying to make a comeback, for him to suddenly almost seems out of nowhere, he's kind of hip again. Is that an exaggeration?
No, for some people, he's hip, especially among young people. And that also has to do with the people surrounding him. So I was at the Butler event a couple of weeks ago, so the second one, after he had been shot. These people actually were so energized because Elon Musk was coming. So when he entered the stage and jumped up and down, I would say a little bit like a child, the people were cheering and applauding him. So he got actually more applause than Trump did. And they said, oh, Elon is great. And I think those people are also very tech-oriented. They like, his space business. So Elon Musk is something like a hip guy for them. And that gives some backwind for Trump.
Your perspective seems to be that this could be the most consequential election since World War II. I mean, you're talking about a huge deal. Why is it that big, not just for Europe, but maybe for the entire Western world?
Yeah, I would say for the entire Western world, especially for democracies in the Western world. And I would say there are two things, or maybe three things, that actually are at the forefront. It's the war in Europe, the Ukraine war. And a lot of governments in Western Europe are afraid that Trump, might withdraw all his military aid to Ukraine. Trump's talk about having done a deal within 24 hours with Putin is probably something that the Europeans think it's a nightmare, because within 24 hours, you will only settle something that Putin is satisfied with. Trump says to Putin, keep what Russia has occupied and then just draw the line, and then we go from there.
Kind of a partitioning.
Have a partitioning of Ukraine. From my point of view, this is dangerous. It's not feasible because Putin will never stop. He has said that he wants to reverse the security composition of Europe. He wants to actually reestablish the Soviet Union. And I think this is a major threat, not only to Germany, especially to Poland and the Baltic states. That is one of the biggest fears. The second one are tariffs, because tariffs will harm also European exports to the United States. And they will raise prices. So this is another big fear. And the third one is also about multilateral organizations. So Trump is not at all interested in the United Nations or NATO or the EU. He doesn't think in organizational structures. So he will probably be very friendly to some of the European leaders who are more autocratic, like Viktor Orban in Hungary or Fico in Slovakia. And he will probably be tougher on the other leaders, like the German Chancellor, the British Prime Minister, the French President, and so on.
Well, there's been, as you know, a rightward shift ideologically in Europe in the last couple of years. Has that dramatically changed perspectives in Europe as a whole about what I think 5 years ago, 10 years ago would have been far less popular?
Yes, but in terms of foreign policy, there's also a huge rift among the more populist or right-wing populist parties. So you have rifts all over. And I think Trump will try to actually, foster and support those relations to the more right-wing pro-Putin. And you could see that when he was president in his first term, so that he had no understanding of the European Union and he was very much pro-Brexit. But now you have in Great Britain a different government under Labour who tries to get closer back to the EU because they feel the economic pain that Brexit meant. So I think there you will also see new alliances, and that make it more problematic also for Trump to deal with Europe.
Where is the EU really going to end up here? And what does that mean in terms of the relations between Western Europe and the United States of America?
I don't have a crystal ball, but what I can tell you, you will see probably a little bit more of centralization in some aspects and decentralization in others. You will see more of a centralized security policy that, especially when it comes to defense and acting in favor of Ukraine and securing our borders. You will see more decentralized effects when it comes to part of the economy, also parts of the asylum laws that some countries will treat them differently as others, and a different take of, how to protect your borders. But you can also see that in Germany, who was very much concerned about the influx of refugees. It used to be a huge dividing issue in the EU. It is not anymore that much, because you've seen that Scandinavian countries, the Netherlands, Austria, Poland, Hungary, and Germany have gotten tougher on securing outside borders or even having controls inside the EU. That was a no-no for all the Schengen countries. Schengen means you control the EU's outside border and you have a free movement of people inside the Schengen country. So now you have seen, more and more inside border controls.
So obviously in America, we have struggled, it's fair to say, with securing the southern border. Some would argue it's getting better, not worse, but it's pretty bad. Is there any parallel between what America may do to fully secure the southern border versus what they've done in the last 4 to 8 years, and what Europe and European countries you're talking about are already trying to do in trying to have a more clear, let's say, policy for immigrants coming in?
I think you will see parallels. I think you will see more robust outside borders and processing asylum requests at the outside of the border and not letting all people into the EU. In the long run, also some changes with German asylum law. So far, when you look at the German asylum law, if somebody comes and says he's an asylum seeker, he has a right to enter and then to be processed. And that can take 4 years until it's decided if he has the right to stay or he has to go. But, if the courts decide he has to go, it's very difficult to send them back because in their home countries there are wars or they don't have a passport or whatever. There are a lot of countries that have already built fences. And, I think a lot of people have also become aware that Putin has used refugees as a weapon.
Yeah.
He has let people from the Middle East come to Moscow and then send them to Belarus and then into Poland and other countries. So he's used refugees, to undermine European democracies because he knows that there is a portion of the population that is very much afraid of immigration.
When you talk about Russia and China, in America right now, more of the focus in the last couple of years has been on the threat that China poses, not just economically, but potentially militarily. Whereas in Europe, it seems that the focus is more on Russia. And of course, Russia has, among other things, a stranglehold to some degree on energy and on energy resources, which is a vital lifeline for the people in Europe. So is it different, perhaps, an American perspective on what maybe they perceive to be the biggest threat today, being probably China over Russia versus Europe, which sees it in reverse?
Well, you're right. It has changed a little bit. And I think, if you had asked me a couple of years ago, I would have said China is now seen as a bigger threat. But since the war in Ukraine and Putin's, wish to reverse the European security structure and to reestablish the Soviet Union, Putin is a more immediate threat because all those things happen in our neighborhood.
Right.
But you've also seen a change on China. So I think it will be tough, also looking at our economy and our dependency of the China trade, to go along all the way with the United States. So what you will see and what they talk about is taking some of the industry back to Europe, especially when it comes to the chip industry or to medicine, pharmaceutical products. So de-risking is the word of the day, but it's a no to decoupling. So saying, okay, we'll stay away from China. I think for the German industry, but for many others, it's a no-no because we're so intertwined and also so dependent already that decoupling would actually, you could lock down Germany afterwards.
So in this campaign in America, top issues: the economy, abortion, immigration, and probably right behind that, the word democracy. Are those four issues that square up with what's happening and are top of mind to people in Europe?
Economy, certainly. I think many countries, and also Germany, are actually in a bad spot at the moment. So there is a huge need for major reforms. The second one is immigration. Yes, that is a major concern, especially in the past years. You know, we have taken in more than 1 million refugees from the Middle East in the wave of 2015 and 16. The third one, democracy, yes. In Germany, we have a right-wing party called the AfD. They're also seen as a threat to democracy, rightfully so. Abortion, no. Abortion is not an issue. And I would say most European countries have a right of choice, as Germany does, and other countries. And I think no one is actually, talking about that.
We are very focused here on the presidential election. What races are coming up in Europe that America should look at?
I would say you have to look at France. President Macron is also in a difficult place at the moment. And then you should look at Germany. We have general elections next year, next fall. And you will see a different coalition, I'm pretty certain, than the one we have now. So it's really interesting. AfD has some similarities with the Trump party. The other parties, they don't go that way. They're more critical about immigration for tougher laws, but they would never adopt the language that Trump has adopted because that is a no-no in Germany.
Isn't it very fluid over there? I mean, you look at what happened in Great Britain recently, where Labour Party came back into power, and almost it seemed immediately the polls are showing people are not very enamored with the Labour Party, and they're waiting for them to do something. Do you think that is a model for what is happening, or an example of what's happening in other nations around Western Europe?
I talk to a lot of young people and who are, as I am, very human rights oriented. And I think you can still have a more stricter immigration policy and uphold certain human rights. But I think you need to control your borders better than you have done that, because the consequence is that people will get very unhappy, and this feeds the narrative of the right-wing party. And the Democratic parties will lose this debate. So I think you should show that you can be tough on your border and at the same time also have a humane approach and helping the people that have the need, and you can have a controlled immigration. We all need, including the United States, we all need a workforce.
Right.
I mean, I've driven through this country, through the Midwest in the past months. Even in the furthest out towns in Ohio, I saw we're hiring. In Germany, which has not much growth, but you still see all over signs we're hiring. So we need the people.
We need the labor.
We need the labor, as we cannot just produce our labor in our own country. We need immigrants. But you need a controlled and organized system, whom you let in and whom you don't let in.
Is it fair to say that Europe as a whole is perhaps rooting for one candidate over another, or are they just of a mind, whoever it is, we're going to have to find a way forward because we have to do this together?
I would say overall, the huge majority of countries within the EU hope for a win of Kamala Harris. You will see other countries like Hungary or Slovakia that will celebrate a victory of Trump. I think the European power play will also shift. You will see Great Britain moving closer towards Germany and France under this Labour government to see a way forward to deal with a Trump government. And I think if that happens, we need to find ways to deal with the government and to see where we could work together and where we part from one another, because we have very different opinions and standards. But this needs to be figured out.
Do you think America's image over the last 10 years has changed fundamentally in terms of its prestige, its influence, its power, et cetera? Do you think that's fundamentally changed, and that is why, in part, there is a reimagining by a lot of people in this country of a different kind of relationship with allies and others around the world?
It's not as huge as it used to be because other powers are emerging, like China and a little bit, on the military level, Russia. So you see also other alliances evolving, like the BRICS movement. So it's going to be interesting to see how, if Trump becomes president, how that is going to develop. So you see shifting powers, shifting alliances, and I think that's the world we're in. All is in flux, and everyone is looking for new positions. But I think the image of the United States has changed, and you can see it in large parts of the world also because of the Middle East and the war between Israel and Hamas and Hezbollah in Gaza, in Lebanon, where you see a lot of second thoughts, how is that going to go in the future? And can you sustain a policy where the Palestinians have not their own state and no say? So this is something that is really concerning a lot of countries. And you see that the world around is, still looking for new positions. But what is clear that the role of America is not the one it used to be a decade and a half ago.
Because the world, Martin, has become much more complicated. There is a restlessness out there. And it's not just in this country, it's in countries around the world for something that works.
Yes.
And when something is perceived not to work, that's when that gives rise to all sorts of potential alternatives, which is why I think you've seen a lot of the movements that are happening in Western Europe. You've seen the movement even within this country. We really appreciate your perspective. You've done incredible work bringing knowledge to the table, especially for people on this side of the pond, so to speak, that we don't normally have.
Well, thank you so much. It was great being here. Thanks for having me.
Take care.